The Industrial Revolution. So you've probably studied the Industrial Revolution back in world history, and today we're just going to confine our discussion to the American experience. And essentially, the Industrial Revolution in the US finds itself in inventions with agriculture, industry, as well as transportation. So the Industrial Revolution begins in the 1750s in England, and they invent the steam engine, which is eventually improved by John Watt. And it took a really long time for the Industrial Revolution to come over to the US for a number of reasons. First and foremost, land in America was really cheap, and so many people preferred farming to factory work. Because when you look at it, who really wants to stand for 13 hours a day working for someone else when you can work your own land and reap the benefits from that directly? There was also a labor shortage. Immigrants will soon come and help fill that shortage, but in the meantime, there just simply wasn't enough labor to stuff all of these factories and mills for industry. There also wasn't a lot of money for business investment. Remember, it costs a lot to start up your own factory or your own mill, and there just wasn't enough banks around loaning people this type of capital to start their own business. Consumers were also scarce. So it doesn't make sense to invest so much money in a business when you don't really have a lot of people to be able to buy the products and goods that you'll be creating. And then those feisty Brits had set up a monopoly over the textile industry. As we'll find out later, they actually prevented a lot of their engineers from coming over to the US and spreading their inventions here. So it would take longer for many of those plans and inventions to take root here in the United States because the Brits wanted to keep all of the goods to themselves. So the Industrial Revolution in America really sees its roots in New England. It becomes the industrial center of the US, and this is for a number of reasons. It has very poor soil for farming, which we've discussed previously. So farming wasn't really an option, so that leaves really industry and manufacturing. There was a very dense population. Remember, the cities, the urban areas are extremely densely populated, and so that's good for labor. You'll be able to staff people in those factories and those mills. They were also the center of shipping, and so with shipping, that brings in a lot of goods and services. It also gives you the opportunity to send your products to other parts of the country as well as other parts of the world. And the seaports made the import of raw materials and the export of finished products really easy. So for a number of reasons, it was just extremely convenient for the Industrial Revolution to take root in the already developed New England area rather than, say, the South, which we'll talk about in a moment. And American industry really booms after the War of 1812. The Protective Tariff of 1816 is instituted, and so this keeps domestic goods cheap and foreign goods expensive. So here are some of the advances in agriculture. Over there on the top right, you have a picture of Eli Whitney, and this guy is really a genius. When it comes to cotton, cotton was really rare and expensive, and the reason it was so rare and expensive is because it was very, very difficult to cultivate. You actually had to have an individual separate the lint from the really tenacious green seeds of most of the cotton varieties. And so this was extremely labor intensive. So Eli Whitney goes ahead and creates the cotton gin. He was a Yale graduate, and he devised a mechanism for removing the sticky seeds really quickly. And so this becomes known as the cotton gin. And you can see a picture of it in the middle of the screen there. So we go from 1 pound of cotton per worker per day when working by hand and separating those sticky fibers to 1,000 pounds per worker per day when using the cotton gin. So as you can imagine, cotton just explodes all over the place. Everything starts to be made out of cotton. Profits skyrocket as a result of this increased productivity. And then cotton becomes the major crop in the South, and really the only crop. And so this becomes known as king cotton. So the South really digs a hole for itself here because it becomes completely reliant on the production of cotton. You have these huge plantations that are established throughout the South, and all they grow is cotton. And so as a result of these bigger plantations, it creates a need for more slaves. And so more and more are imported. Now, this genius Eli Whitney isn't done, okay? In 1798, he also creates interchangeable parts. And so what he does is he uses a box of parts to assemble a musket, ensuring that every part of the musket would be exactly the same. And so this becomes the basis for mass production. So you're able to take the same parts and make the same type of item. And so you're able to mass produce a lot of these items, a lot of these muskets, for example, because they're all using the same parts. And so that makes assembly really quick, really fast, and extremely efficient. And so by using interchangeable parts, this will find its way into other areas of industry too, and mass production will find its way in other products and not just necessarily muskets. Okay, some other advances in agriculture. Iron plows, really exciting stuff. So this eased the job of breaking the soil. This was back-breaking work. You used to have to take, a shovel or a picket, and you'd have to actually dig into the soil manually by hand. And so an improved plow is developed with parts that could be replaced. Because previously, if your plow broke, you had to replace the whole thing. But now plows were being built with replaceable parts. So if one part broke, you could just replace the part. And so it became more economical to purchase plows. And so then John Deere, the cool guy with the green riding mowers, he creates a steel plow. And the steel plow is really instrumental in breaking up the very hard soil of the Great Plains area. The Trans-Allegheny region becomes the nation's breadbasket, and so this will soon rival the South in terms of production, meaning that the South now does not have complete ownership over farming and crops. That because of the plow, you could take land that was previously not very good and plow it and break it up with the use of the iron plow. You also have Cyrus McCormick, who produces a mechanical mower reaper in the 1830s. And so this is a way for farmers to quickly mow their lawns and reap in their wheat. And reaping just basically means to pick. Farmers go into debt quite a bit to buy land and machines, and they need ways to more quickly transport items, which will come to big revolutions in transportation coming up. So here are some of the advances in transportation. We talked about the National Road already. The Wilderness Road opens, and you can see a picture of it over there on the right. And this becomes the principal route westward for pioneers, really from 1790 to 1840. It was first developed by the frontiersman Daniel Boone. And the road follows old buffalo traces and Native American paths, but much of it had to be cut through the wilderness. So trees had to be cut down, and it was a very, very difficult path to kind of carve out. Early on in the Wilderness Road, many travelers fell victim to hostile Native Americans who would lie in wait for travelers coming through. And the road eventually is abandoned in 1840, but most modern highways actually do follow much of the route of the Wilderness Road because it did such a good job of opening up the West through the Kentucky region. Some additional advances in transportation. Water transport at this time is very popular. Previously, people were using flatboats, which is basically a bunch of logs tied together that just kind of went down the river, of its own accord by the current. And then at the end, you could sell your flatboat for timber. Well, steamboats were developed, and so steamboats provided cheaper and faster transport. Robert Fulton and Robert Livingston create the very first steamboat, and it's called the Clermont. You can see a picture of it at the bottom of your screen. And the steamboat was a really great invention because it didn't have to just rely on the current. It had its own power, powered by steam, perfected by James Watt. And so the steamboat could go through wind and wave and tide and downstream current because it had its own propulsion system. So this really increased the speed of water transport. Okay, and so now that we have vessels that can take us down the water, we needed to create additional avenues by which those vessels could travel. And so production of canals really opened up quite a bit. The most popular, well-known canal that was built during this time was the Erie Canal. And the Erie Canal connected the Hudson River and Lake Erie. And so it opens in 1825 after 8 years of construction, and it has a huge impact on the country and the region. It reduces the travel time from New York to Buffalo. It reduces the cost of moving a ton of freight from $100 to $5. That is an incredible bargain. It inspired canal mania throughout the country. Because of the success of the Erie Canal, canals are being built all across the country now to kind of duplicate that success. And the Erie Canal makes the entire Great Lakes region an economic tributary to New York City. So now New York City has access to the whole Great Lakes region, and it opens up a whole new market of consumers for the factories and the mills in New York City. And it ties together the East and the West, and then further alienates the South, which will lead to growing tension and sectionalism. And this canal mania results in the additional construction of canals in Ohio and Indiana. And then as a result of those, they connect up to the Erie Canal, and most of the Ohio Valley is also drawn into New York's economic sphere. So the Erie Canal is really responsible for making New York City kind of the center of industry and trade at this point, and really helps it to become a worldwide city. So here you can see a map of the Erie Canal. You can see how difficult it was to get to the Great Lakes before the Erie Canal was created on the left. And then over on the right, you can see how much easier it is to get to the Great Lakes after the Erie Canal is created. And it cuts the distance basically in half. Other advances in transportation, the railroads. So the most significant contribution to a continental economy was the railroad. And so this was known as the Iron Horse, railroads were. And railroads were a little sketchy in the beginning. A lot of people were a little hesitant to ride on them. Some travelers reported seeing ladies' shawls ignite on trips. One woman got off a train and noticed that there were 13 holes in her dress and her veil. And so it was kind of a, really jerky, bumpy, wearing ordeal. And so many people, elected not to use railroads. They preferred actually water transport because it was just real calm and smooth and, very comforting. Whereas railroads, you really never knew what you were going to get. But they were, of course, extremely efficient. So the first one appears in 1828, and by 1860, there are over 30,000 miles of railroad track in the United States. And the majority of that, of course, being in the North, as the South stays tied to agriculture, specifically cotton. And so you can see there some of the flaws of the early railroads. There were a lot of safety flaws, like I said, sparks everywhere. Women and other passengers' clothes were known to be burned, bad brakes, so there were often accidents. They were hardly ever on time. And then they took away a lot of money from the Erie Canal investors as well, because the railroad, of course, was competing with the water transport on the canals. And then we have advances in textiles. So Great Britain had made the majority of the advances in textiles, mainly through the steam engine that was improved by James Watt. And the steam engine allowed for powered machines in textile mills. And so that allowed workers to work more quickly. And so Great Britain forbid the export of these machines that were created and prevented mechanics from leaving the country. So they wanted to keep all of their inventions and all of their secrets to themselves. And that's also one of the reasons why the Industrial Revolution took longer to take hold here in the United States. But they couldn't stop everyone. Somebody got by, and his name was Samuel Slater. He comes to Rhode Island, and he had actually memorized the inner workings of a British textile mill and duplicates it here in the U.S. So he's awesome. You can see a picture of him over in the top right. He evaded British law against immigration of textile workers so that he could come to America and seek his fortune, and he certainly did make quite a bit of money when he creates British textile mills here in the United States. The Slater Mill becomes the first American factory to successfully produce cotton yarn using water-powered machines. And these water-powered machines just make everything more efficient and faster than previously when it was all just done by hand. Also some advances in communication. So telegraphs were laid across the Atlantic Ocean by Cyrus Field. You can see a picture of the telegraph in the top right over there. And the telegraph does go through some growing pains. It goes dead after 3 weeks, but a permanent cable is laid in 1866, and this cable connects the United States and Europe, so we're able to communicate with one another. Then you have the Pony Express. And this was basically the first attempt at a home-delivered mail. It's established in 1860 to carry mail from St. Joseph, Missouri, all the way to Sacramento, California in about 10 days. That's service for you, isn't it? But the mail service collapsed after 18 months because it didn't make much of a profit. Kind of like the same situation the U.S. mail system is facing today. I don't think they've made a profit in years. And so as a result of the collapse of the Pony Express, Samuel Morse's telegraph machine takes over, and this is essentially how messages would be delivered to different peoples through the telegraph machine, and wires are laid throughout the country. And we have a market revolution. So because all this industry starts popping up, the self-sufficient family disappears. More and more people leave the hard work of farms to go and work in factories. They also think that they can make more money in factories. And so since families are not growing their own food and creating their own products, that forces people to have to shop for the things that they need because they're no longer making it themselves. Everyone used to be self-sufficient, but now with advances in technology, you didn't need to be anymore. You know, for example, why make your own pizza when you can call up, Pizza 3.14 and get one even better? So the same type of thing is happening right here, okay? You're going to stores to buy products just to kind of save time and make your life easier. And also during this time, we see a big gap starting to widen between the rich and the poor. And this is most obvious in the cities where we have the majority of the industry. And then finally, working conditions during the Industrial Revolution are not so hot. Workers are working really long hours. 12, 14, even 16-hour days were not really uncommon. You can see in the picture I have here, 2 women working in a textile mill. This was very common. They typically worked in mills called Lowell mills, and they became known as Lowell girls. So what happened is that in New England, there was actually a shortage of men because they all went west to claim their own land. So you have a bunch of women just kind of left over, no husband to seek. They got to figure out a way to make a living, and so they go and work in these Lowell mills. And they're called Lowell mills because the name of their inventor, his last name was Lowell, Lowell. And so they become known as Lowell girls, and they work very difficult hours. They live in, dormitory type situation, and the conditions are really pretty awful. Not only are they working long hours, but they're working for low wages. There's very poor ventilation in these textile mills, and so they're inhaling all of these dangerous vapors and fumes. The lighting is bad, so they're not able to see what they're doing, so there are lots of accidents, people losing limbs, getting cut, burning themselves. And there's very little heating, so in the winter, they're basically freezing as they're trying to, weave all of these yards of yarn. There's also some issues with child labor. So in 1820, more than half of the nation's industrial workers are under 10 years old. So families, in order to make money, are having to put their small children to work, which of course would become the target of some of the social reforms that we'll learn about next week. And unfortunately, factory workers were forbidden by law to form labor unions to get their wages raised and to get better working conditions. So they were forbidden from banding together and forming a union to advocate better working conditions for themselves. That wouldn't always be the case, but it is right now. So the life of the factory worker was not quite so pleasant. But the Industrial Revolution brought a lot of inventions and technology to the country that would make the United States go quickly on its way to becoming a world power.